really like a lot of what the Browns did. I think they're in our favorite draft bucket, right, Sam? One of our
I really like their draft.
Did the Cleveland Browns just win the draft? Because this is not one of those years where you look at their board and have to squint to understand the plan. This time, the plan was right in front of everybody. They traded down, still got the offensive lineman they wanted, doubled up at receiver, found one of the better safety values in the class, rebuilt the offensive line depth, and even took a wild upside swing at quarterback. And here's the part nobody is talking about. This was not just a Browns draft. This was a full roster reset disguised as one weekend.
They had a lot of picks, but it started, they had pick 6, they traded down to pick 9. When that happened, we theorized, hey, we think they were in on Spencer Fano. Maybe they would have loved Carnell Tate if he was still there, but he's off the board.
Yeah.
At 6, they trade down to 9, still get Fano, pick up extra picks.
The whole thing started at pick 6. Cleveland could have stayed there, taken Spencer Fano, and most people would have understood it. But instead, they moved down to 9, picked up extra value, and still landed the player they were probably targeting anyway. That is how good teams operate. You do not just take the guy. You take the guy and create more resources around the pick. And for a team that needed offensive line help badly, getting Fano while adding more ammunition was a huge win. This is where it gets dangerous, because Fano might be the best offensive lineman in this entire draft. Some analysts believe he can play all 5 spots if needed, but realistically, the Browns are probably looking at him as a day 1 left tackle. That matters because this offensive line looked completely different a month ago. Cleveland needed bodies, starters, depth, competition, everything. And now suddenly that room has life. Fano gives them a real foundation piece.
Plays day 1 at left tackle, but theoretically he can upgrade one of your 5 offensive line spots and figure out where the biggest need is down the line if you need to. The 2 receivers are kind of fascinating because there's a missing thing to both of them. There's like a concern or a question mark to each of them. In a weird way, they're almost opposites. They almost complement each other, like one's strong where the other's weak and vice versa.
Then the Browns turned around and attacked receiver, and this is where the class gets really interesting. KC Concepcion and Denzel Boston are almost perfect opposites, which is why the fit is so fun. KC is quick, smooth, dangerous after the catch, and one of the best route runners in the draft. He can separate, create space, and make defenders look silly. But the concern is ball skills, drops, catch point questions, and some uncomfortable moments over the middle. That is the gamble. Here's the part nobody is talking about. KC does not have to be perfect to be valuable. If his hands are good enough, his separation ability can make him a real weapon. A receiver who gets open consistently is already solving one of the hardest problems in football. The Browns are betting that the route running, quickness, and after-catch ability outweigh the drop concerns. And honestly, in today's NFL, that is a bet worth making if the player can handle coaching.
I think he actually separates vertically reasonably well. I think he can go past people with that size as long as he's able to avoid or gets better at avoiding contact through the route, press coverage, that kind of thing. He tends to want to attack that physically.
Denzel Boston brings the other half of the equation. He is bigger, stronger, better at the catch point, and more dependable when the ball is in the air. His question is separation. Can he get open enough against NFL corners? Can he avoid contact instead of trying to overpower every defensive back? Can he win vertically with more nuance? If he can, then Cleveland did not just draft one receiver. They drafted 2 receivers who cover each other's weaknesses. This is where young players usually make a mistake. They think their college strength is enough in the NFL. Denzel cannot just bully every corner anymore. He has to learn how to avoid contact, stack defenders, sell routes, and use his size at the right time. KC cannot just rely on being open if he leaves catches on the field. He has to finish plays. If both clean up those weaknesses, Cleveland suddenly has a much more dangerous receiver room.
But Emanuel McNeil-Warren's really good value, I'd say, in the second round. Add him into the mix as a guy that with good size and does everything pretty well, I would say, at safety. I think he could really do some damage in and around the line of scrimmage.
Then came Emanuel McNeil-Warren, and that might be one of the best value picks in the whole class. A safety with size, versatility, and the ability to work around the line of scrimmage is exactly the kind of defensive piece teams love in the second round. And for the Browns, who already have a strong defensive identity, adding another physical, flexible defensive back gives them more options. He may not have been the flashiest pick, but he fits winning football. Here's the part nobody is talking about. The Browns were not just filling random needs, they were hitting value positions and roster pressure points at the same time. Offensive tackle, wide receiver, safety, more offensive line depth, tight end, quarterback upside. That is why analysts are praising the process. Even if you disagree with one player here or there, the overall structure makes sense. It is hard to say they did not understand what the roster needed. The offensive line overhaul is probably the biggest story of the draft and offseason combined. At one point, it felt like DeJuan Jones was the only locked-in starting piece. Now you're looking at Titus Howard, Zion Johnson, Elkton Jenkins, Spencer Fano, Parker Brailsford, Luke Whippler, Austin Barber, Tevin Jenkins, and other depth pieces. That is not just improvement, that is a complete room transformation. Suddenly, they're 9 or 10 deep with real competition. This is where it gets dangerous, because when the offensive line improves, the entire offense changes. The quarterback looks calmer, the run game looks cleaner, the receivers get more time to uncover. The play caller can use more of the playbook, so whether the quarterback ends up being Shedeur Sanders, Dillon Gabriel, Taylan Green, or someone else, Cleveland at least looks like it is trying to build the right environment instead of just asking one quarterback to save everything. And speaking of quarterbacks, Taylan Green is the wild card. He is not a polished passer. He may never become a real NFL quarterback, but the athletic tools are ridiculous. We're talking about a huge quarterback with elite speed, explosive testing numbers, a big arm, and a body type that make people start throwing around crazy comparisons. That doesn't mean he becomes anything, but in the later rounds, that's exactly the kind of upside swing that makes sense. Cleveland's quarterback room is weird, but it's also fascinating. Shedeur Sanders is the point guard type, accurate, composed, and distributor-minded. Dillon Gabriel is undersized but productive and experienced. Taylan Green is the giant athletic lottery ticket. If you could combine all three into one quarterback, you might have something special. But because you cannot, the Browns are basically collecting different quarterback profiles and letting competition sort it out. Green in the 6th round is not the same as using a top pick. It's a swing. Maybe he becomes a backup. Maybe he never figures it out. But the athleticism is so loud that taking the chance is easy to defend. The Browns doubled up at tight end too, adding Joe Royer and Carson Ryan. Royer gives them size, hands, and a more traditional tight end profile. Ryan is a late-round data-friendly flyer with good athletic and production indicators. This is how you build competition at the bottom of the roster. You take players with defined traits and see who survives camp. Now, let's zoom out. Did Cleveland win the draft? On paper, they're absolutely in the conversation. The process was strong, the trade down was smart, the roster needs were obvious, the player fits were logical, and the offensive line is in a much better place than it was before the weekend started. But Browns fans know paper wins don't always become real wins. Fano has to block real NFL edge rushers. KC has to catch the ball when it matters. Boston has to separate. The linemen have to actually become depth, not just names on a board. This draft also gives the coaching staff no place to hide. If Todd Monken is the offensive mind people believe he is, now he has tools. Tackle help, receiver variety, tight ends, quarterbacks with different skill sets. The front office gave him ingredients. Now he has to cook. So did the Cleveland Browns just win the draft? They won the weekend on process, value, and direction. They made a smart trade, they added real offensive pieces, they took upside swings without being reckless. That is what a good draft looks like before anybody plays a snap. But if those question marks become problems, this could be another reminder that winning the draft in April means nothing if you can't win games in September.